She read it out loud. At my own birthday dinner, in front of my son, my grandchildren, and people I had known for 40 years. She picked up the letter my late wife had written me, the one I kept in my jacket pocket because I couldn't bring myself to leave it at home, and she read it out loud like it was entertainment. I didn't move. I didn't say a word. I just sat there and let her finish. That was the night I decided I need to back up, because none of this makes sense without the beginning. And the beginning, if I'm being honest, starts long before that dinner. It starts with my son Theodore. We called him Teddy since he was 3 years old, and the name just never left him. Teddy was my youngest. I have an older daughter, Miriam, who lives in Portland with her husband and their 2 kids. But Teddy was the one who stayed close. Teddy was the one who came to every Sunday dinner, who called me when the game was on, who helped me clean out the gutters every October without being asked. I was proud of that boy in a way I never quite found the words for. His mother, Patricia, my wife of 31 years, she used to say I wore my heart on my sleeve for Miriam, but kept it locked in a chest for Teddy. She wasn't wrong. With Teddy, the love was quieter, deeper somehow, the kind you only understand after it's gone. Patricia died in March of 2021. Pancreatic cancer, we found out in November, and she was gone by spring. 4 months. That's all we got from diagnosis to the end, and I spent most of it pretending I was handling things better than I was. She left me a letter. She wrote it by hand, in the blue ink she always used, on the stationery she kept in the nightstand drawer. She told me things she'd never said out loud, not because she didn't feel them, but because Patricia was a woman who believed in the economy of words. She saved the important ones for paper. I carried that letter everywhere. It sounds sentimental, maybe even a little foolish for a man my age, but I couldn't help it. Having it close felt like having her close, and after 40 years of that woman being the first voice I heard in the morning and the last one I heard at night, I needed something. Teddy met Audrey about 8 months after his mother passed. They'd known each other before, through friends, the way young people do now, but things moved quickly after they started dating. Too quickly, I thought, but I kept that to myself. He was 34. He didn't need his father's timeline. Audrey was, how do I put this fairly? She was charming in the way that a person can be charming when they're working at it. She had a way of asking questions that felt like interest but turned out to be research. She laughed at the right moments. She said the right things about Patricia when Patricia came up in conversation, which was often, because how could she not? I tried to like her. I genuinely did. Miriam had her reservations too, but we both kept quiet because Teddy was happy. And after everything we'd been through that year, happy felt like something worth protecting. They got engaged 11 months after they started dating. I found a bow, not a visit, a text with a photo of the ring. I stared at my phone for a long time before I typed back, "Congratulations, son." She's a lucky woman. I meant it when I wrote it. I really did. Here is what I had at that point in my life. I want to be precise about this because it matters later. I owned the house outright, the one Patricia and I had bought in 1989 in a suburb outside Columbus, Ohio. 4 bedrooms, a yard, the kind of neighborhood where people still wave from driveways. I also owned the property next door, a smaller 2-bedroom house that had belonged to my mother before she passed. I had rented it out for years, but after Patricia died, I let the tenants go and left it empty. I don't know why exactly, it just didn't feel right to have strangers in it. I had retirement savings. Between my 401(k) from 30 years in commercial insurance and the investments Patricia and I had built together, I was comfortable, not wealthy in any flashy sense, but the kind of comfortable where you stop checking prices at the grocery store. About 6 months before the engagement, Teddy had come to me with a business idea. He wanted to open a craft brewery. He had a partner, a guy named, well, it doesn't matter what his name was. He had a partner. They had a location picked out in the short north. They had a concept. What they didn't have was capital. Teddy asked me for $120,000. I said yes. Of course I said yes. He was my son. He had drive, he had a plan, he had enthusiasm I hadn't seen in him since before his mother got sick. I wrote him a check and I didn't call it a loan, I called it a gift. I told him Patricia would have been proud. What I did not do, and I will live with this, was put anything in writing. The brewery opened the following spring. I went to the soft launch. I had a flight of their pale ales, and I told everyone within earshot that my son had built that place. I meant every word. Audrey was there that night, already wearing the ring, already using the word we in a way that included every space Teddy occupied. We're so excited about the expansion. We're looking at a second location. We're thinking about the property next door to your house, actually. Wouldn't that be something? I laughed it off. I shouldn't have. The wedding was the following October. Small ceremony, which I respected. I paid for the rehearsal dinner. 22 people at a steakhouse downtown, nearly $4,000, and I did it without being asked because that's what fathers do. At the reception, Audrey's mother made a toast that lasted 11 minutes and mentioned me once in passing as Teddy's dad. Miriam caught my eye from across the table. We didn't need words. After the wedding, things shifted. Slowly, the way water carves stone. You don't notice it happening. You only see the shape it leaves behind. Teddy stopped calling on Sundays. Then the Sunday dinners became monthly, and then every other month, and then, for about 4 months in early 2023, not at all. When I called, the conversations were short, distracted. There was always something in the background. Audrey's voice, the television, a reason to get off the phone. I told myself it was newlywed life. I told myself this was normal. I had a friend at my church, a man named, well, let's just say I had a friend who went through something similar with his son. He told me the first 2 years of a marriage are a cocoon. Give it time, he said. They come back. I gave it. In the spring of 2023, Teddy came to me and asked if Audrey could move her home office into the smaller house next door. Just temporarily, he said. She was doing freelance marketing work and needed space to focus. I said yes. I gave them a key. I didn't charge rent because he was my son and it seemed small and petty to charge rent to your own child. By summer, Audrey had repainted 2 of the rooms. I noticed when I stopped by to drop off some furniture I'd offered them, a reading chair that had been Patricia's. The walls that had been pale yellow were now a deep gray green. I stood in the doorway and looked at those walls and felt something cold settle in my chest. Not anger exactly. Something more like a premonition. I didn't say anything about the paint. What I did start doing, quietly without telling anyone, was paying attention. I noticed that Audrey had started referring to the house next door as the guest house. As in, we're thinking about updating the guest house kitchen. As in, can we put up a fence between the guest house and your property? The language was subtle. She was good at subtle. But language is how ownership begins. And I had not missed that. I started making notes, not for any plan, not yet, just because Patricia had always told me to write things down when something didn't feel right. Your memory is good, she used to say, but paper is better. My birthday is in November. I turned 68 that year. Teddy and Audrey invited me to dinner at their house, the main house, mine, which I had let them use for a family gathering a few months prior, and which had somehow become their house in the conversation. Though the deed still had my name on it. Wait, let me restate that. I need to be precise. Small house next door. My mother's house. I still owned that outright. The main house, the one I had lived in since 1989. Teddy and Audrey had been staying in for about 3 months. The original idea had been that they would stay while their apartment lease ended and they found something to buy. That had been in July. It was now November. There were 12 people. At dinner, there were 12 husbands, 2 couples Teddy knew from the brewery, Audrey's parents, and 3 people I didn't recognize at all. Audrey had organized the seating. I was at the far end of the table from my son. The food was good, I'll give her that. Audrey knew how to host. She had candles, she had music, she had a floral centerpiece that probably cost more than most people's grocery bill for the week. Somewhere between the main course and dessert, Audrey reached into my jacket. My jacket was hanging on the back of my chair. I wasn't wearing it. The room was warm. She leaned over, the way you might reach for a napkin, and before I understood what was happening, had the letter in her hand. She said, "Oh, what's this?" I said. "Please put that back." She looked at the handwriting. She looked at me. Something moved behind her eyes. I can't describe it any other way. And she said, "Is this from Patricia?" And then she started reading. She read my wife's letter out loud. At my birthday dinner, I will not repeat what was in that letter. It belongs to me and to Patricia and to no one else. But I will tell you that my wife had written things in those pages that she had never said to another living soul. Things about her fears, about our early years, about the way she had loved me that she could never quite say with her voice. Private things, sacred things. Audrey read 3 full paragraphs before I stood up. I did not raise my voice. I want to be clear about that. I stood up, I reached across the table, and I took the letter from her hand. I folded it. I put it back in my jacket pocket. I looked at my son. He was looking at his plate. That was the moment. Not the reading, as unforgivable as that was. The moment was my son looking at his plate. I said, "Excuse me," and I walked out of the room. I got my coat from the closet. I drove home to the place I'd been staying, a spare room at my sister's house in Westerville, about 20 minutes away. I sat in that room for a long time. I thought about the brewery, about the $120,000, about the house next door with its repainted walls, about the main house where my son was not looking up from his plate while his wife read my wife's private words to a room full of strangers. I thought about Patricia, and then I picked up the phone and called my attorney. Her name is Beverly. No, wait, the attorney. I had used the same law firm for 15 years, a small estate practice in Upper Arlington. My attorney, I'll call him by his name, which is real. His name was not relevant to you, but his advice was. He told me that everything I was thinking was legal, that a gift is a gift, not a debt, that property in my name is my property, that I had the right to do everything I was considering, and that if I wanted to move quickly, we should start the following morning. We started the following morning. Here's what I did in the order I did it. First, I called the real estate agent I had used in 2019 when I briefly considered selling the smaller house before changing my mind. I told her I wanted to list it immediately. Furnished. As is, she had comps pulled within 24 hours. We listed it 4 days later. Second, I had my attorney send a formal notice to Teddy and Audrey that their use of the main house was not a lease and carried no tenant protections under Ohio law, and that I was requesting the property back within 30 days. This was not a surprise to my attorney. What surprised him, I think, was how calm I was when I signed the letter. Third, I called my financial advisor and began the process of restructuring my estate plan. I won't go into detail because some of it is still in process, but I will say that I made some changes that cannot be easily undone, and that I did so with full clarity of mind, fully documented, with 2 witnesses present. Miriam called me 3 days after the notice was delivered. She had heard from Teddy. She said, "Dad, are you okay?" I said, "I'm better than I've been in 2 years." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I saw this coming," and I believed her. I think we both had in the way that people see things they're not ready to name. Teddy called me 5 days after the notice. I let it go to voicemail. He called again the next morning. I let that go too. On the 3rd call, I picked up. He said I was being irrational. He said I had blown something small completely out of proportion. He said Audrey hadn't meant anything by it, that she thought it would be meaningful to share his mother's words with the family. He used the word meaningful 3 times. I let him finish. Then I said, "Teddy, I love you. I have loved you since the moment I saw you. But you sat at that table and you looked at your plate, and that told me everything I needed to know about where we are." He started to say something else. I said, "I'll talk to you again when you're ready to have a real conversation. Until then, I think it's better if we have some distance." I hung up. The smaller house sold in 19 days. Multiple offers. It sold for $64,000 over asking price, which in the Columbus market at that time was not unusual, but still surprised me. I sat in my attorney's office when the wire hit, and I thought about my mother, who had bought that house with her school teacher's salary over 40 years. And I thought about how she would have felt about all of this. I decided she would have understood. Teddy and Audrey moved out of the main house with 4 days to spare. I know because my neighbor, a retired postal worker named Actually, she's just my neighbor. She doesn't need a name in this story. She texted me that the moving truck left on a Thursday. I drove back the following Saturday. I had not been in that house in nearly 4 months. Walking through the front door was, I don't have the right words for it. There was a smell, a different arrangement, evidence of a life that wasn't mine in every corner. They had moved the furniture, not drastically, but enough. Patricia's chair was gone from the living room, not stolen. I checked, it was in the garage, covered with a drop cloth like it was something to be stored rather than something to be sat in. I brought it back inside. I set it in its place by the window. I sat in it for a while. Then I opened every window in the house and let the November air come through, and I started making a list of everything I needed to do to make this place mine again. My list was 3 pages long. I am still in that house. I am writing this to you from the kitchen table where Patricia and I had coffee every morning for 26 years. The air across from me is empty, but it doesn't feel as empty as it used to. Teddy and I have not spoken since that phone call. It has been 7 months. Miriam talks to him sometimes. I don't ask her to report back and she doesn't. I have hope that someday he will call me, not to argue, but just to talk. To say, Dad, I think I understand now. I'm not holding my breath, but I'm not closing the door either. What I know is this. I spent 68 years building a life. I worked for it. I saved for it. I loved people with everything I had for it. My wife is gone. That part I can't change. But what I still have, this house, this chair, the letter in my jacket pocket, that belongs to me. And I will not apologize for keeping what is mine. If my son decides he wants his father back, he knows where to find me. I'll be right here.